gathering and giving, but not worrying. I don't know about you, but maybe we get the gathering and the giving part. Gathering others, welcoming others into our midst, into our lives, and giving. It's the not worrying part that's something else altogether, isn't it? In considering John the Baptist, we sometimes focus, when we think about John the Baptist, we focus on the seemingly wild man from the wilderness who eats locust and wild honey, who startles with his speech, calling the people a brood of vipers. We forget about him and his cousin Jesus, both leaping in the wombs of their respective mothers, Elizabeth and Mary, the first time they ever met. We forget that John did more than merely come from the wilderness. He was called to it. He was called to the wilderness, much like those early members and clergy of this parish back in the day. They embraced their call to what was the wilderness of these sea islands, gathering and giving. It's what today's readings are about as we make our way through Advent, the season of anticipation and expectation. John the Baptist not only talks about, he embodies a life of risk. A life of risk. Do you know what that's like? It may be how you live. I think we are invited throughout our lives to live such a life. And I'm not talking about one that recklessly endangers self or others. That's not really what I'm talking about. But a life where we weigh the consequences and we wade in, we jump in anyway. We willingly become, as St. Paul described it, fools for Christ. Fools for Christ. This is the invitation to us all. We jump out and into the world knowing that we might well fail, but we do it anyway. One of the things we're not allowing our young people to do these days is to fail. And we as society need to do better about that, because that's often the only way we learn. We recognize that any so-called failure is but the chance for a new start, a new beginning that we might otherwise not have had. Years ago, when I knew that I was, or felt strongly that I was called to the priesthood, I remember having the support of the parish and the vestry, and it was the Diocesan Commission on Ministry where I bumped up against things. And I remember the response was, well, we definitely see a call here, Callie, but we want you to wait a while. Why don't you live your life a while longer? You've said you want a family. Why don't you, you're young, why don't you go ahead and start your family? We want you to have time for that and not have your seminary disrupted. And whatever I thought whatever. Appalled silently that in their minds in the year 1999, that a journey into priesthood and family at the same time seemed incongruous. But they continued. How about you do this? How about you also start a Spanish-speaking ministry for the diocese? Sure, I said, knowing that it was a test. And so I did. And that Spanish-speaking ministry early on was entirely dependent upon donations. And there were some months that first year that my paycheck was late because there wasn't any money. But I hardly remember, as I look back on it, we were talking about memories in Sunday school today. as I look back on it, I didn't even think about it because I knew that where God guides, God does provide. And that trust and keeping on were key. It's the age-old learning for the people of God. Give us this day, today. Luke's version of the Lord's Prayer goes, our daily bread. Today, no assurances for tomorrow. None of us is promised tomorrow. And even so, you might fall flat on your face. As the famous Theodore Roosevelt line goes, it's not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the one who's in the arena. You know this famous quote. The one whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who comes up short again and again, who does actually strive, who's spending oneself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. It's what Harper Lee has Atticus Finch famously described regarding the definition of courage. You remember, he said, it's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through no matter what. When you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through. I suspect John the Baptist knew on some level that things would not end well for him. He didn't know that King Herod would have his head on a platter, but he knew that he was called to step out in faith and risk it all as he gathered and gave it all. I experienced an episode yesterday afternoon where I knew I was licked before I even began. Let me tell you about it for just a minute. I had an outside wedding an hour away. I'd collected my vestments, of course, which is something I've done hundreds of times when there's something off-site. So upon arrival, an hour away, I went to put on my vestments. I put on my black cassock, the one I'm wearing now. I then put on my white surplice, only to discover that I had inadvertently retrieved from the vesting closet not my surplice, that's this white garment, not mine, not Chris's, but yes. You guessed it. Eric's, the curate's. You can imagine. So I just had to gather it up and process in as if it was the most normal thing in the world to have to hold up one's vestments so as not to fall flat on my face. Or worse, with all the wind yesterday, and this place was on the water, all the wind yesterday resemble a parachute. But I had to remind myself it was not my day. It was the bride and groom's day and the family's day, and I was simply called to do my job, period. No matter how ridiculous I might feel or appear. It's that bit about being a fool for Christ. And simply learning, because we have fallen flat on our face so many times before, learning not to take ourselves quite so seriously as we might sometimes be inclined to do. Because really, it's all about gathering and giving it all and giving up all, even our very selves, our souls and bodies. But oh, what a ride it will be. So don't you worry, God's got you. God's got us. Amen.